I need to tell you about the night a $3 billion empire crumbled because of a single kiss. Not a kiss of love, a kiss of betrayal, the kind that echoes so loudly it drowns out everything that came before it. This is the story of Elena and Damien, and how a woman who gave everything learned to take it all back. But before we dive in, do me a favor. Hit that like button and subscribe, because what you're about to hear will change the way you think about loyalty, ambition, and karma. Trust me, you won't want to miss how this ends. It started on a Tuesday night in a small Mediterranean village most people couldn't find on a map. Elena was 28 years old, standing in her grandmother's restaurant, watching the rain hammer against the windows. The place was empty. It had been empty for weeks. The village was dying, the tourists had stopped coming, and the restaurant that had fed 3 generations of families was gasping its last breath. But Elena kept cooking, not because she thought anyone would come, because cooking was prayer for her. Every dish was a conversation with her grandmother, who had passed 2 years earlier, leaving behind recipes that weren't written down. They were felt, tasted, remembered in the fingers and the heart. That night, a man stumbled through the door, soaked to the bone. Damien, 32 years old and drowning in a different kind of rain. He'd been an investment banker in the city, the kind who wore expensive suits and made promises he couldn't keep. But the market crashed, his firm collapsed, and he lost everything. His apartment, his car, his reputation. He'd been wandering for days, and somehow he ended up in that village, in that restaurant, with nowhere else to go. Elena looked at him, this broken, shivering stranger, and did what her grandmother had taught her. She fed him. She made him a dish that didn't have a name in English. It was lamb braised in wine and honey, with herbs her grandmother had grown in the garden behind the restaurant. It came with bread she'd baked that morning and a sauce that had been passed down for 200 years. Damien took one bite, and I'm not exaggerating when I say it changed his life. He looked up at her with tears in his eyes and said, "This is the most beautiful thing I've ever tasted." Elena smiled. She didn't know she'd just handed her future to a man who would steal it. They started talking. Damien saw something Elena couldn't see. He saw potential. He saw profit. He told her, "You're sitting on a gold mine. This food, this experience, it's not just a meal. It's a memory. People will pay anything for a memory." Elena was hesitant. Her food wasn't about money. It was about love, about family, about keeping her grandmother alive in every bite. But Damien made her a promise. He said, "Let me handle the business side. You handle the magic. 50-50 partners. We build this together, and we honor your grandmother's legacy." She believed him. Why wouldn't she? He looked her in the eye and shook her hand. 50-50. She gave him everything. The recipes her grandmother had whispered to her in the kitchen. The techniques that took years to master. The stories behind every dish. Because every dish had a story. She taught him how to taste, how to feel the food, how to understand that cooking isn't about following instructions, it's about intuition. And Damien absorbed it all like a sponge. They opened their first hotel a year later, just one small boutique property with 12 rooms and a restaurant. They called it Casa Elena. Her name, her vision, her soul baked into every brick. And it exploded. Within 6 months, people were driving 4 hours just to eat at Casa Elena. Food critics called it transcendent. Travel magazines called it a hidden gem. Elena worked 18-hour days in the kitchen, perfecting every plate, training every chef, making sure that every guest felt what she felt when her grandmother cooked for her. Damien handled everything else: the marketing, the expansion plans, the investors. Within 2 years, they had 3 locations. Within 5 years, they had 10. Casa Elena became a brand, a lifestyle, a symbol of luxury and authenticity. But success changes people. Slowly at first, then all at once. Damien started talking about faster growth, bigger deals, international expansion. Elena wanted to slow down, maintain the quality, protect the integrity of what they'd built. They argued. He'd say, "You're a chef. Let me handle the business." She'd say, "This isn't just business. This is my grandmother's legacy." But he stopped listening. He was too busy chasing the next deal, the next city, the next billion. That's when Charlotte appeared. 26 years old, a corporate lawyer from a family that owned hotel chains across Europe. She was everything Elena wasn't. Polished, calculating, cold as marble. She walked into Damien's office one day with a proposal to take Casa Elena public, and she walked out with something else. Him. I don't know if it was love or strategy on her part. Maybe both. But she whispered things into his ear that Elena never would. She told him Elena was holding him back, that sentimentality was a weakness, that if he wanted to be a billionaire, he needed to stop treating the company like a family heirloom and start treating it like a machine. And Damien listened. He started making decisions without Elena. He began cutting costs, cheaper ingredients, faster service, less training for the chefs. Elena noticed. Of course she noticed. She could taste the difference. She confronted him, and he brushed her off. It's just business, Elena. We need to scale. But it wasn't just business. It was everything. Then came the dinner. Damien invited her to their flagship restaurant to celebrate their success. He seemed nervous, which was unusual. They sat at a private table, and he slid a stack of papers across to her. Just updating our partnership agreement, he said. Legal formality. Makes things cleaner as we expand. Elena trusted him, completely. She'd built an empire with this man. She signed without reading. Why would she read? They were partners. 50-50. Except they weren't. Not anymore. She just signed away her 50% ownership for a consulting fee. A fraction of what her share was worth. The documents were buried in legal jargon, designed to confuse, designed to deceive. By the time she realized what she'd done, it was too late. Lawyers confirmed it. The signature was binding. Damien owned Casa Elena. She owned nothing. 3 months later, Damien announced his engagement to Charlotte. The engagement party was held at the flagship Casa Elena, the restaurant Elena had designed, the terrace she'd planned, the garden she'd planted with her own hands. She was invited, but not as a partner, as a guest. She stood in the back watching Damien give a speech about building his empire from nothing. From nothing. He talked about his vision, his sacrifice, his determination. He didn't mention her name once. Not once. He didn't mention her grandmother's recipes. He didn't mention the woman who taught him everything. He erased her from the story like she never existed. And then, at midnight, it happened. The kiss. Damien and Charlotte stepped onto the terrace, the one Elena had designed to overlook the garden where she grew the herbs for her dishes. They kissed under the string lights she'd hung, surrounded by the jasmine she'd planted. Elena watched from the kitchen window, and something inside her didn't break. It woke up. She realized in that moment that he hadn't just stolen her business. He'd stolen her legacy, her grandmother's legacy, and he'd done it with a smile on his face. She walked out that night and never came back. 6 months passed. Elena disappeared. Damien didn't look for her. Why would he? He had everything he wanted. Charlotte, the empire, the billions. Casa Elena expanded to 75 locations worldwide. Damien's face was on magazine covers. He was called a visionary, a self-made billionaire, a genius. But something was wrong. Customer reviews started declining. People wrote, "It's not the same anymore. The magic is gone." Chefs couldn't replicate Elena's dishes. They had the recipes, but they didn't have her. They didn't have the love, the intuition, the soul. Damien ignored the complaints. Numbers were still good. Stock was still rising. Until it wasn't. A new competitor emerged, Heritage House. Small boutique hotels in major cities, each one intimate, each one exquisite. The food was extraordinary. Critics called it transcendent, the same word they'd once used for Casa Elena. Reservations were booked months in advance. No one knew who owned it. The company was privately held, backed by anonymous investors. But every Heritage House location opened near a Casa Elena, and slowly customers started switching. Charlotte grew paranoid. She hired investigators to find out who was behind Heritage House. Meanwhile, Damien couldn't stop thinking about Elena. He tried to find her, but she'd vanished completely. No social media, no forwarding address, no trace. His empire was still profitable, but it felt hollow. He'd lie awake at night, remembering the taste of that first meal she'd made him, the one that changed everything. He realized too late that Elena wasn't just the chef. She was the heart. And without her, Casa Elena was just another hotel chain. Then the investigators found the truth. Heritage House was owned by Elena. She'd partnered with chefs from her culinary school, people who valued art over profit. She'd found ethical investors who believed in her vision, and she'd been systematically opening locations near every Casa Elena property, winning back customers one meal at a time. She wasn't competing, she was reclaiming. Casa Elena's stock crashed. Investors panicked. They wanted Damien out. Charlotte saw the writing on the wall and did what people like Charlotte always do. She abandoned ship, filed for divorce, took half of Damien's remaining wealth in the settlement. She told him, "I married the empire, not the man." The board removed Damien from his own company, rebranded, tried to salvage what was left. But it was too late. Within 2 years, Damien had nothing. No company, no wife, no money, just debt and a reputation built on stolen recipes. 2 years after that, Damien walked into a heritage house. He didn't know Elena owned it. He just wanted to taste that magic again. He wanted to remember what it felt like to eat something made with love. He sat at the bar, ordered a glass of wine, and waited. Then she appeared. Elena. Older now, wiser, more confident. She walked out of the kitchen and their eyes met across the room. She led him to a private dining room. They sat across from each other in silence. Finally, Damien spoke. "Why?" he asked. "I made you rich." Elena smiled, but it wasn't cruel. It was sad. She said, "You made yourself rich. With my recipes, my legacy, my soul. You didn't just steal my business, Damien. You erased me from the story. You stood on that stage and talked about building from nothing, and I was nothing to you. That kiss on the terrace wasn't about Charlotte. It was about you kissing goodbye the woman who gave you everything. And karma? Karma isn't me destroying you. You destroyed yourself." She stood, walked to the kitchen, and returned with a single plate, the dish she'd made him that first rainy night. Lamb braised in wine and honey, the dish that started everything. Damien looked down at it and started to cry. He took a bite, and it tasted like memory, like everything he'd lost. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I was greedy. I was blind. I'm so sorry." Elena nodded. "I forgive you," she said. "Not for you, for me. So I can move forward without carrying your weight, but you'll never taste this again." She walked away. Damien sat alone in that private dining room, crying over a plate of food he didn't deserve. He never rebuilt his empire. He works now as a consultant for small businesses, teaching people the mistakes he made, trying to repair some of the damage. He's humbled, maybe even reformed, but he'll never be what he was. 5 years later, Heritage House has 50 locations worldwide. Elena wrote a memoir called The Recipe Thief. It became a bestseller. She restored her grandmother's original restaurant in the village and turned it into a culinary school. She teaches young chefs the recipes, the techniques, and something more important. She teaches them to never give away their magic, to never let anyone steal their story. I saw a photo of her recently. She was in her grandmother's kitchen, teaching her own daughter to cook. Her daughter, maybe 7 years old, was kneading dough with flour on her nose. Elena was smiling, and in that smile was everything: justice, peace, legacy. She leaned down and whispered something to her daughter. I don't know what she said, but I imagine it was this: "Remember, recipes are stories, and stories have power. Never let anyone steal your story." And that's how a billionaire built everything on borrowed love and lost it all with one kiss. If this story gave you chills, do me a favor. Smash that like button, share this with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more untold stories of betrayal and justice. Drop a comment below. Do you think Elena went too far, or did Damien get exactly what he deserved? I'll see you in the next one.